All right, I have something fun for you today. If your idea of fun is nerdy homeschool videos, we are going to be comparing and contrasting 3 different literature-based history programs for homeschool. This was a requested video. I was asked to compare Sequence 1 from Gentle and Classical with Sonlight Level A, which is an exploration of American history aimed at roughly a first grade level, as well as Beautiful Feet Books, Early American History for K through 3. All 3 of these are rich literature-based programs that are focused on history, so it's no wonder that they would naturally be compared and that families might be trying to decide which one of them might be the best fit for their family. So I'm going to talk about the differences, similarities and differences, the unique features of each program today. Links down in my description below. I have affiliate links with Gentle and Classical as well as Beautiful Feet Books. When you use my affiliate links, I get a small commission of the sale at no extra cost to you, and that really helps me out a lot, helps out my family, and helps me to keep making these videos. So I do appreciate all of you who use my affiliate links. Thank you so much for taking the time and using those. But let's get started. Now, first of all, full disclosure, I do not own all 3 of these programs, and I have chosen one specifically for my family. I'm going to talk at the end of the video about why I chose the one that I did. But throughout the video, I'm going to be talking about the different features of each program to help you choose the one that's best for your family. So I have chosen one, but I have used multiple programs from Sonlight, as well as from Beautiful Feet Books, as well as from Gentle and Classical. So I feel very familiar with the style of each of these programs in order to compare and contrast them. So let's talk about the first major thing to note about these programs. Number 1, do note that they do have a slightly different history focus between the 3 programs. That's something to be aware of depending on what you want to focus on for your year of history. All 3 are heavily focused on early US history, but there are some differences. So Beautiful Feet Books covers early American history from before settlers arrived up until roughly around the Civil War era. Sonlight covers a similar time frame. It's not going to cover all of the exact same events or people in the same way, but it is also specifically meant to be focusing on American history and exploring American history at an introductory level. Sequence 1, on the other hand, is not solely focused on US history. Instead, it's focused on the historic time period between 1450 and 1815. So it starts off with touching on some European history subjects and events, including the Renaissance, as well as the Christian Protestant Reformation. And it also does not go as far into recent history as the other 2 do, stopping in 1815. So you're not going to cover anything related to the Civil War in Sequence 1, because it's focused more so on that time frame versus on solely US history. Number 2, point to notice about the 3 different programs is that they cover different subject areas. Beautiful Feet's program is specifically designed to cover your history. Now, that does not mean that it's not going to touch on any other subject and that other topics are not going to be woven in. History kind of naturally tends to involve some exploration of geography, some exploration of art, and you're reading books. So there is definitely literature involved as well. It is interdisciplinary, but it is also specifically designed to be a history program. Sonlight, on the other hand, their core program is the History Bible Literature program. So within the Sonlight A guide, you're going to have a graph for what you're learning about the Bible, your Bible readings, and your Bible memory verse for the week. You're going to have your history readings, and you're also going to have your literature readings, your chapter book read-alouds. And your chapter book read-alouds are not necessarily going to be tied into the history. Those are your literature. So that's exploring early chapter books that are worth reading with your kids. You also have poetry involved as well in Sonlight. And you get some explicit geography books as well as just the natural integration of geography with history by using map work. Now, for sequence 1, it covers a slightly different set of subjects. You have your history, of course. You are also focusing on U.S. geography throughout the year, the geography of the 50 states as well as U.S. territories. You also get some learning statements regarding grammar and spelling, as well as Bible, catechism, and some short stories are scheduled for an exploration of literature and folk tales as well. So that's all within sequence 1. It's also recommended that you can integrate into sequence 1 the On Mission and Morning Virtues resources from Gentle and Classical. So if you do integrate those resources with On Mission, you're also going to get World Geography, and with Morning Virtues or Morning Classics, you're going to get your literature read alouds, you're going to get your folk songs, hymns, memory work, poetry, sonnets, memory work. So you're getting the composers and artists study as well, so kind of the riches within a Charlotte Mason education style. All of those are integrated through using Morning Virtues or Morning Classics. Do note that I do have specific videos going all the way over sequence 1 and all of its parts and pieces, and I also have videos going over Morning Virtues and all of their parts and pieces and what to expect. So I will link to those videos down below if you'd like a closer look at specifically those resources, because in this one I'm really just trying to talk through the differences and how the different major programs compare. But if you want details on sequence 1, you can check out those videos. Now, number 3, let's talk about the guides and the different approaches that each one takes to the teacher's guide, because each one of them has a very different approach to a teacher's guide. You can find free samples of each program's teacher's guide online on their websites, so I highly recommend checking those out to get a feel for them and see which guide kind of jives with the way that your mind works the best, see how you can wrap your mind around using these programs. But I'll talk a little bit about the differences here. Also, for sequence 1, you can actually find the complete teacher's guide available as a free PDF from Gentle and Classical. All right, for Sonlight, what can you expect from the teacher's guide? Well, Sonlight is famous for its weekly grid format. They have had those around for decades. We love the weekly grids. You have your Bible, you have your history, you have your literature. See, I know the exact order on the page. You have that a week at a glance page, so you know exactly what you're supposed to read each day. But then as you turn the pages, there's always several pages behind that weekly grid page, which will have your discussion questions for all of your readings, any further notes or information for the teacher, and it will also kind of point out which figures or events you might want to add to your timeline of historical people and historical events, and they will also outline any map work that you can do, anything that you can be noting down on the maps, and they'll also have the maps right there in the teacher's guide for you, so that if you're reading about a historical event, then you can turn to that page in the teacher's guide and find the map of where that event occurred. For Beautiful Feet books, they are also very consistent in what you can expect from their teacher's guides. They tend to have very beautiful images in the teacher's guide, so they might have historical paintings, they might have maps, they might have photographs of artifacts. So the teacher's guides from Beautiful Feet, you definitely might want to be showing and using the images from the teacher's guides during your lesson. So with the teacher's guides from Beautiful Feet, you definitely might want to be showing and using some of those images from the teacher's guides during your lesson. For each lesson, you are really given step-by-step instructions for completing a lesson. You're told what pages to read in what book, you maybe are given some discussion questions or some notebooking prompts. You're told which image to cut out from the back of the book or to copy from the back of the book and paste into your notebook. I'll be talking about notebooks in a minute. You might be given website links. There will also be additional and extra information and extra activity ideas besides just what's in the lessons. The Beautiful Feet books guides have rabbit trails, which are extra suggested books that you can use. They have recipes and that you can make to celebrate finishing up learning about different periods in history. If you like to do a lot of cooking, you might really enjoy those. So that's what you can expect from a Beautiful Feet books guide. Then for the Sequence 1 Teacher's Guide, Gentle and Classical also takes a very consistent approach with their teacher's guides. In Sequence 1, you'll expect to see a 2-page weekly spread, which has all of the learning points for that particular unit and all of the reading assignments for that particular unit right there on the 2-page spread. And when you first see that 2-page spread, depending on how comfortable you are with planning your homeschool, you might look at that and be like, okay, so how do I do all of this? How do I get all these readings done? If you're feeling like that, don't worry, because you can actually also buy at a very low price. You can buy weekly grids, weekly schedule grids for Sequence 1, which will tell you, read this Bible story on the first day of the week, and read this short story from the Fables, Aesop's Fables book on the second day of the week. And they'll schedule out the readings for you. They'll tell you what student notebook pages to do. So you do have the option of purchasing the weekly schedule and weekly grid for Sequence 1, but if you don't like grids, you can also just skip that and do your own planning and weave it together in your own way. Okay, number 4, how does each program involve notebooking? With Beautiful Feet Books programs, notebooking is a big part of the program. There will be prompts within the lessons throughout the guide to work in your notebook, to write in your notebook, to add an image to your notebook, and Beautiful Feet Books does provide images, black and white images typically, that you can copy and your children can color or paint and paste into their notebooks, and then they can write about what they've learned. They can do written narrations. You can add even recordings of what different activities you did in learning about that point to your notebook. Sonlight, on the other hand, does not explicitly include notebooking. It's much more focused on verbal discussion as a way of interacting with what you read about. There is some bookwork suggested. Sonlight suggests doing a timeline that you continue to build upon throughout all of your years of using Sonlight. So a timeline notebook, and they have images available for that timeline notebook, or you could make your own or make your own drawings for that. They also incorporate some map work and some interacting with maps or finding places on maps. Now, this doesn't necessarily stop you from incorporating notebooking if you wanted to. You definitely could be handing your kids a notebook while you're reading aloud from Sonlight, and they could be drawing, they could be taking notes, they could be writing about what stands out to them from the books that you're reading. You could incorporate it, but it's not explicitly designed as a part of the program. Then for Sequence 1, there is a student notebook, a pretty thick student notebook that is explicitly designed and is part of the bundle available from Gentle and Classical. This is not just an open notebook. This is something with very specific pages and page layouts for you. So for every history point that you're learning about, there will be a copywork page. There will be an open-ended narration page where the child can draw and write about what they've learned. And there will also be a more directed activity page as well. So there's kind of a blend of different types of pages, and there are also more somewhat open-ended notebooking pages regarding the states to record the geography information that you learn about different states. Now, the 5th point of comparison I wanted to talk about is talking about how many picture books are used versus how many chapter books are used in this program. And this is something that's really worth thinking about when you're thinking about your first introduction to history, you're with a young child, and the realistic level of attention span that your children have at the age that they are. Now, looking across these 3 levels, Sonlight Level A has the fewest picture books incorporated, and it does have a lot of chapter books incorporated for the read-alouds, for the literature that you're doing. Now, do note that these read-alouds are not necessarily connected to the history that you're learning about through the history spine, heroes and happenings, or the history picture books you're reading. They might be on a separate topic because that is intended to be the literature element, not necessarily what you're learning through history. One good reason that their read-alouds are not connected to the history at this point is that a lot of chapter book read-alouds that are historical fiction tend to be pretty heavy, and they don't really tend to be aimed at first grade read-aloud level. So I very much understand why they didn't tie in all of their read-alouds to the history, but that's just something to note. And that's something to be aware of. The read-alouds will be read-alouds that are doable probably for a first to second grader, but they won't necessarily be historical fiction read-alouds, as they are more likely to be in some of the older grades. Then for Beautiful Feet books, for the early American history, K through third, it is all picture books. There aren't really any real chapter books incorporated in the 23 core books of the program. I believe there are 23, somewhere around there, if I'm remembering right. Now, Beautiful Feet Books does suggest additional books, plenty of additional book choices. If you want to go crazy on getting extra books from the library, you definitely can. They have lots of suggestions in their rabbit trails, but their core books for the program are pretty much all picture books. They're just sticking with picture books for this early year level versus going more into the longer historical fiction or historical chapter books. Something to note also is that Beautiful Feet Books includes a lot of the Dallaire, not 100% sure how to pronounce their name, but the Dallaire historical biographies of George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, different historical figures, Pocahontas as well. Some people love those and some people do not love those and prefer to avoid them. Sonlight doesn't have any of the books by those authors. Beautiful Feet Books has a lot of them, and Sequence 1 recommends some of them. So each program has kind of a different approach to the set of books by those authors. That's just something to note. Some people are huge fans, some people prefer to not use the books. That's a whole separate issue, but it's good to note when you're looking at and comparing the programs. Now, for Sequence 1, what is the reading load like? For Sequence 1 itself, does not include chapter books. It's heavily picture book based. They are longer picture books, of course. These are historical picture books, not your preschool picture books. But for Sequence 1, you have about 36 picture books for your history learning. So you have a hefty amount of picture books for your historical learning through the year. There are also a few more additional books that contain short stories, like your folk tales, your fables, Aesop's fables that you're learning, some short classic stories, as well as some geography texts that you're reading. So there's a lot of books. I'm kind of think Sequence 1 actually has the highest book load. So if you're like me and you just really love books and want an excuse to keep building your library, you might want to give Sequence 1 a look. But that's something to keep in mind. They really focus on picture books and short stories. For Sequence 1 itself, there aren't any chapter books. Now, if you choose to integrate Morning Virtues or Morning Classics, those programs do recommend chapter books. And when you look at the chapter books that they recommend, some of those might actually be a little bit too advanced for a first grader. So you just have to look at those. You got to know your kid and think about, is this read aloud going to work for the age of my child, for the attention span of my child right now? I am planning to integrate Morning Virtues and Morning Classics. But probably for the first year, the first grade, when we're working on Sequence 1, we're going to be doing Morning Virtues, and I will be switching out a few of the chapter book read-alouds to do read-alouds that are more age appropriate for a 6-year-old. Okay, now I'm going to wrap up this video with talking about why I chose between these three, which all of them I think are very solid programs. I think you can't really choose wrong if you're looking for literature-based history for your early elementary learners, and history of the US, specifically United States. I don't think you can go wrong with any one of these. I do think some might fit the needs of some families better than others. It might just fit the way that your brain is organized as a homeschool mom a little better than others. For me, I decided to choose Sequence 1. And why did I decide to choose Sequence 1? I knew that with my oldest being just 6 years old when he's going into first grade, he is a very eager learner. He's always loved books. However, I do feel like I just want to still stick mostly with picture books at this age versus really jumping heavily into chapter books or into nonfiction texts like The Heroes and Happenings from Sonlight, because Sonlight was a very strong contender. But I felt like I wanted to stick more with the short stories and more with the picture books incorporated in Sequence 1. A second reason that I chose Sequence 1 was for the flexibility of it. I liked that by looking at the teacher's guide, I could clearly see what the learning point of a particular unit was about. I could see that, oh, we're learning about the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, I know what the learning point is supposed to be. So if I, for some reason, don't like the book that's in the book list, or if maybe if I already know I have another book on my shelf about that topic, then I know, hey, I can use the book I already have instead of buying something new, or I can use another book that I like better for whatever reason. I liked the flexibility of being able to see exactly what the learning points were supposed to be and then being able to adapt the book list. So yes, I'm using sequence 1, but I did switch out a few books on the book list due to books that I already had in my family's collection, or just books by authors that I really like. Just fun fact, I like Jean Fritz and her humor. And we already had several Jean Fritz books, so I did pull some of those into my plan because we had them. I know that I personally enjoy them, not everyone does, but I was able to adapt it very easily in that way. I also really liked that having those specific memory statements, and just I think my mind just jives very well with the way that Gentle and Classical is laid out. Being able to see what specific memory statements we're working on, what the specific learning point for the unit is, I think that just fits very well with my brain, being able to know we're just focusing on this topic for now. We're gonna work on really becoming familiar with this topic during this unit, and then we're gonna have other topics in the other units. I like that. And homeschool mom, just liking something is a helpful factor in deciding which curriculum to use. I'll just be honest with you. You are a really big part of your homeschool. So using resources that you just enjoy, that you like, that you feel comfortable with using, it's not the only factor, but it is a very real factor to consider when choosing what works for you. And finally, another reason that I ended up choosing sequence 1 was because I liked the easy way to incorporate the riches using morning virtues, being able to incorporate the artists and composers and folk songs and all of that very easily using those resources. Of course, you still could add those resources. If you were using Beautiful Feet books for history, you could still use morning virtues if you wanted to add in this composer study and artist study and all of that. You definitely could. They're flexible and they're actually designed to be able to be used with different curriculums. This is just kind of your morning time, your riches subjects. But I did like that they were naturally incorporated, and because those are not comfort zone areas for me, I did not grow up learning about artists and composers and listening to classical music and all of that. I did grow up singing hymns, so I know a lot of the hymns. Like the Bible area is more of a comfort zone for me, but kind of going more toward the artist side is not so much of a comfort zone, and I liked that. I liked that it made it easy. I've learned to very much in areas that I'm not comfortable with, finding, like Spanish, finding tools that make it easy for me to incorporate it, make it much more likely that it's actually going to happen in my homeschool. So there is your comparison of these 3 fantastic curriculums. Make sure to open my description for the links down below, and if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'm happy to answer if I can, and definitely subscribe to this channel for more nerdy homeschool videos. I'll be seeing you. Bye!